All right, guys, so brisket, it can be the bane of our existence, right? Well, what I'm going to share with you today is can't fail brisket. I'm telling you, just follow these steps. It's always something that people can have trouble with. I mean, for several reasons. Among those reasons are maybe you didn't trim it right. Maybe you didn't season it right. Maybe you forgot a very key step. Maybe the temperature while you're cooking changed, and maybe you cooked it too short, maybe you cooked it too long. There's a number of reasons that brisket, fails, and obviously we all want to have, whether it's just party at your house or whatever it may be, we always want to have the best brisket available, and people can make sure that they want to get more. I mean, it's a memorable thing. Well, what I'm going to show you today is step by step can't fail brisket. I'm telling you, just do this and you'll be happy in the end. And more than anything, everybody who eats it is going to have a good time. Now, there's some key ingredients that you have to have. We're going to start with the brisket, and I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. How to pick it out, how to trim it, what to look for, some key elements that you do. But I'm going to say a couple things right off the top. I never, ever, ever, ever inject a brisket. I also want to always make sure that I cook it low and slow. I cook mine for a long time. If you want to do it that way, you won't fail. I promise you, you won't fail. So I've had some terrific briskets that are cooked for like 6 or 8 hours. Mine is going to be more, depending on the size of it, to the 17 hours to 19 hours. And you're like, oh my gosh, I don't have 19 hours to commit. That's fine. If you're going to do it on a weekend, you can do the same thing in about 10 or 11 hours with a little higher temperature. But if you want to follow it the right way, let's say you have a pellet grill, makes it a lot easier, right? Because you can just fill the pellet bin back up, and you're good to go. That's about the gist of it. You can go to sleep. You don't have to miss a lot of sleep. Personally, on the weekends, I don't use the pellet grill. I like to use the stick burner. I'm going to tell you what wood to use. But if I don't have the time, I will use the pellet grill. For our purposes, that's what I'm going to use today, the Traeger, which I really love. I have the Timberline model, and it's a fantastic Traeger. But let's start with the brisket itself, and I'm going to take you step by step how to make can't fail brisket. I promise you, you'll love it. All right, so the first thing obviously is the brisket. It's not to be taken lightly. Brisket size, I mean, it's up to you. How many you're going to feed, how long do you want to cook it, or whatever. But you got to pick the right brisket. Make sure that the tip and the flat, and I'm going to show you what that's all about here in a second. Not too big of a discrepancy there. It's fine if there is. We can work with it. But I picked out, I went to Texas Star Grill Shop and picked out a Nagaushi brisket. You don't have to do that. For me, it's just going to be easier because of the marbling. It's going to be better, first of all. It's going to be easier for me to trim it up the way I want. It's a great cut of meat. Now you get a bigger brisket, you go to the grocery store and you get one, it's nice 18, 19 pounds with a lot of fat. I'm gonna explain all that, but you can see right here, this is a beautiful brisket. Now there's some fat there, of course. We're gonna talk about all that. There's some on the sides, and there's a key element that you gotta do on the sides. You see that brown right there? I'm going to show you something that's going to make a big difference in how your brisket tastes. It's absolutely gorgeous. This is the meat side. The fat side, I'll show you here in a second. The fat side actually doesn't have a whole lot either. Now, I'm going to trim the brisket, but I'm going to show you something real important here in a second about this meat. You see this edge right here. You see where this is right here. I like, before I even trim the flat, this is the flat part, and this is the tip. And the reason they call it the tip, this is a big muscle, of course. It's on the chest of the beef, of the cow. And there's actually one muscle down here, which is why it's flatter. And then there's two muscles, a layer of two muscles right here. And that's why it's a little heavier. One thing you got to do when you trim, now this one is already pretty set, but I'm going to show you how to trim it. You want to leave about 1/4 inch everywhere. But before you do all that, that brown side that I showed you, that's not going to absorb the seasonings that you put on there quite as well. Neither will this side. You want fat, you want it to render, but you don't want a lot of fat. And if it's real hard like that, you You can hear that actually. That's too much fat and it's not all going to render. So you want about a 1/4 inch all the way across. But before you do anything, you trim about a 1/4 inch all the way across to expose some meat, and then all the way across this side to get rid of some of that brown and that moisture meat. The meat that's a lot moisture. That's going to be absorbing it's going to absorb the seasoning, the rubs, a lot better. And your brisket's going to be right off the top. As soon as you start trimming your brisket, it's going to be tasting better than other briskets if you do that one step. So I'm going to trim it up. I'm not going to bore you with all that. Then I'll tell you about rubs and such. Okay, so I trimmed that side that I just showed you. Now you might be thinking, well, why are you getting rid of all that? It's not that much, first of all. And you see how moist that is right there? It's already looking juicy. You take just about a 1/4 inch off of there and the rub's gonna bind better, and it's gonna be a much better brisket when you're done. This is just the first step. Now the other thing it does, it shows you just how much fat is on the sides. And so it shows you, if you want to leave about a 1/4 inch or so, exactly how much fat to cut. So I'm going to go ahead and trim up the rest of this. By the way, I did it on the other side as well. Look at that. That's already juicy. One more helpful hint here. When you trim the brisket, make sure it's cold because it gets a little rubbery, a little soft, and it's harder to trim if it doesn't have to be frozen. You don't want it frozen. But you want it nice and cold right out of the refrigerator after you take it out of the package. By the way, this is about a 15-pound brisket. And so, as I mentioned, it's easier to cut that way. Use a really sharp knife. I'll show you what I'm using right now. Personally, I like to use a little paring knife like this. Now, some people will like a bigger knife or maybe even a longer, skinnier knife. I find that when I use that knife, it's a lot easier to handle. You can grab the fat a little easier, make one long stroke if you can. If you cut too deep and get a little bit of meat showing, don't worry about it. We can work with that. All right, so I've trimmed the sides, left about a 1/4 inch, give or take, all along the sides. I didn't even trim that. That looked just about right. Now there is a key element here. I even trimmed some here on the side, about a 1/4 inch all the way around. You can see that's how you want it to look right there. Now there is a key element here when you're trimming your brisket. It's that thing right there. Remember I said it's 2 muscles? Well, that's the fat underneath one muscle, and you're going to have to basically carve on this side, and wedge it out to be about a 1/4 inch, and that'll leave the brisket nice and flat and even for a perfect cook. So I'll trim that out, and then I'll show you the rest. Oh man, look at that brisket. It's already looking juicy. Both sides trimmed edges trimmed perfectly, as well as the back. And that's that little part that I cut a little V out and left about a 1/4 inch of fat right there. So what that does is, if you look at the brisket from the side, you can see nice and even, nice thick flat. So you're going to be able to get a great cook. Now, when it comes to rubs, if we're talking about competition, that's a whole different story. If you're talking about the way you want to do it at home, I keep it very simple. Again, I always say this, but just so you know, these are all, including the agouti beef, these are all unpaid endorsements. So this is the first rub I put on, and it's Dan Pastorini's Texas style rub. It's a little bit on the sweet side. Now, if you've watched some of my other videos, you know that I like to mix that with the Southside Market regular sauce on my ribs and chicken, but not on brisket. Because you're cooking brisket so long, you're going to get a nice flavor from the smoke, and you want that. I like to use mesquite and oak, a combination of those. A lot of times I'll do the last 3 or 4 hours with cherry to get that little sweet finish. So you want that tartness from the smoke, that good smoky flavor with this. And then here's another one, unpaid endorsement, the Spice Guys Dark Bark. And what this does, it gives you just a beautiful, beautiful dark bark on your brisket. It's kind of a cheat code, to be honest. So I'm going to rub up this brisket and then I'll catch up with you guys and show you the next step to start cooking. But if I can just say this again, if you do all this that I just told you, your brisket's already going to be better than most briskets that people and backyard cookers do. I mean, just look at that. That's before any rub or anything. All right, so now you can see I've rubbed the entire brisket, and you can see on the bottom layer there and on the edges is the pastorini rub. Now, obviously, use whatever rub you want. I'm just telling you what I use. And then a little light sprinkle on top of the dark bark. Now, what I generally do is I'll put it in the refrigerator for about, I'd say 3 or 4 hours minimum. And then we'll be ready to cook. Now, just so you know, when I get the fire going, I'll give you all the temperatures and how long and when I change it and what else I put in there. There's are a couple of other ingredients that you're going to need at the very beginning. You're going to, obviously use mesquite and oak. And then I'll get you all the details here, but let's let it sit for about, I'm going to let it sit for about 4 hours, and then we'll get to cooking. All right, we got the brisket out of the refrigerator and about to put it on. Now let me tell you how we're going to end up doing this, because I'm talking about can't fail brisket, right? Well, a lot of people will tell you I like to go hot and fast. I like to go low and slow, like really low and slow, like 18, 19 hours. I think I alluded to that earlier. Now those cooks are fantastic and I've done them all, but if you want a can't fail brisket, you set your smoker or your stick burner at 225 degrees, and it's going to be 225 the whole time. And there's a reason for that. It'll go a little bit quicker, but not too fast. The smoke will still get in there. And if you've done everything that we've talked about already in terms of seasoning and trimming the brisket, it should be fantastic. So we're going to go at about 225. And of course, when we get the internal temperature, you're going to need a probe. Internal temperature to about 160. That's when we're going to take it out, and we're going to add a couple of key ingredients that really kind of put this brisket over the top and guarantee that it's going to be a perfect brisket for you. You're going to need 1 bock beer, really only about half a bock beer. What you do with the other half of that beer is totally up to you. I know what I do with that other half of that beer. And you're going to need a little bit of OG sauce, just a little bit. I'll show you exactly how to do it. Once it gets to 160, you take it out and you do that, and I'll show you how we wrap it and season it from there, etc. But the key thing here with this brisket is obviously keep the temperature at 225 or thereabouts for as long as you can, and then you're going to end up wrapping it. But we'll get to that step in just a little bit. Right now, let's get this brisket on. All right, we got the Traeger. I'm using the Traeger today at 225. The brisket is good to go. It looks perfect. It was in the refrigerator for a while now. Here's another key thing: fat side down. No matter what anybody tells you about fat side up, don't do it. Fat side down. Right in the middle of the grill, and you'll be good to go from there. So let's make sure that we get this thing done. Close it up, and forgot the temperature. Put it in the fatty side of the meat. Don't go all the way through. Be sure on that. Put it in the fatty side of the meat, right about there. Nice and deep, and then we'll see you when it gets the internal temperature to about 160. All right, guys, got the temperature for the brisket up to about 160 degrees, and this is where it gets good. This is the fun part. This is going to be one of the most key things you do to make sure you have that can't fail brisket that I've been talking about. Let's start right here. This is where the OG sauce and a beer comes into play. Now let me explain this a little bit before we get to our brisket and get it right back on the fire. So the thing about briskets and a lot of meats when you're smoking, a lot of people spritz them with apple juice or some combination of apple juice or whatever. Some people use other things or whatever. But what I've found is with the OG sauce, if you give it a good coating and then you just put a little bit of beer, like half a beer on each side of the brisket before you wrap it in the peach paper, as I'm talking about, and I'll show you here in a second. It makes a world of difference. Now, why beer? Some people have made beer chicken and it kind of tastes, it overwhelms it a little bit. you just want to put about a quarter of a beer on each side of the brisket after you baste it, cover it with the OG sauce, because there's actually enzymes in beer that help the moisture kind of adhere to the meat a little better as you're finishing your cook. And what that does, it makes it even more tender, more juicy than ever before. Kind of works the same as spritzing without that apple flavor, which can kind of work against some of the things. But what the beer does, it does that. Also, the beer with the smoke, it helps it adhere and gets that good flavor on there as well. OG sauce speaks for itself. It's been one of my go-tos. Not a lot. Again, I'll show you here right now. So what you're gonna do is you can start with the OG sauce and just give it a little bit of a beer right here, a little bit of the OG sauce right on top, and just kind of cover the whole brisket. And I'm going to put a little bit more on here, but you get the gist of it here. And then I'm going to do that the rest of the meat in a little bit, but I want to show you the beer first of all. Man, I love that sound. And you may say, why are you using Modelo? A lot of people like to use lagers on stuff like this. Personally, I'm using Modelo because I like Modelo, and I'm only going to use half the beer, so I'm going to drink the rest. And so, again, also an unpaid endorsement. So what you do is this. Let me move this right here. I call it a blessing. Just a little bit of a beer on each side. Just a blessing of beer. Leaves you about a half can for yourself. So I'm going to finish that, put that back on, wrap it in the peach paper that you saw right there, real tight, and it's going to go to work for the remainder of the cook all the way until it hits 204 degrees. And then I'll show you the final product. Okay, so I finished putting the OG sauce, coating the entire top of the brisket, not the whole brisket, wrapped it in the peach paper, and if you notice, I put the probe, the temperature probe, right through the paper into the tip side of the brisket. That does two purposes. Obviously, you want the main thing to get the temperature right. The other thing it does is it kind of holds the paper down for you. So we're going to get this to about 204 degrees. We're about 5.5, maybe 6 hours into the cook, and then I'll show you the finished product, and you're going to have a can't fail brisket. All right, guys. The total cook on this took just under 12 hours. Follow all the steps and you won't fail, I promise it. You're going to see it when I see it because I just took it off the grill about 45 minutes ago, let it rest for about 45 minutes, and we're good to go. Don't forget all the steps that you saw in this video, all the products, the Dan Pastorini rub, the Spice Guys, dark bark, obviously OG sauce. Don't forget you can go to ogsauce.com and pick some of that up for yourself. And of course, just about a half beer on each side, but watch the video again if you need any help. But you're gonna see it when I see it. So the brisket is done now. Oh my goodness. That looks really, really good. I'll make one cut here. You can see all the juice and how flexible it is. I'll make one cut right down the middle. And look at that. Some people have to squeeze their briskets to get them juicy. You won't have to squeeze this one, and you'll be the hit of whatever it is that you're doing. Don't forget also to subscribe to this podcast. Subscribe to this YouTube channel and enjoy your brisket. This one is going to be delicious.